Tonight, the 68-year-old tortured and murdered in his own home. The hunt for a girl who disappeared from an army base 30 years ago. And the relentless investigation to prove a mother and father had murdered their daughter. Hello and welcome to Crimewatch. We're back live from our studio, which tonight is full of police officers from all over the UK. They include detectives from West Yorkshire investigating that shocking torture and murder of 68-year-old Clement Butch Desmere. It happened in Bradford back in August.
This is the chair where you found Butch, isn't it?
Yeah, this is where Butch was brutally murdered. There was blood, and all the indications are that this is where he was a subject of a sustained and violent attack.
Unusually, we also have officers from the Royal Military Police here. They're using specialist technology, including age progression, in their renewed investigation into the disappearance of little 2-year-old Catrice Lee. She went missing from a British Army base in Germany over 30 years ago.
Catrice was so young when she went missing. This is one of the hardest cases I've worked on. Different people are going to know her at those different ages. Hopefully something in one of those images will help someone or give us that crucial piece of information.
And former policeman Martin Bayfield is here with more wanted faces and CCTV.
Yes, tonight the faces include this man, Ivan Leach, a dangerous escaped prisoner who needs catching fast. And some shocking CCTV of burglars stealing from around a helpless 80-year-old woman. And this knife-wielding robber who managed to escape past 2 policemen in Essex.
And Matthew's got some fantastic news on some of our previous cases.
Yeah, really great results, including the return of a rare medieval jug which had been stolen from a museum, and the jailing of this violent gang of bank robbers. I'll also have the story of how an investigation lasting almost a decade was finally able to prove that 17-year-old Shafilia Ahmed had been murdered by her own parents in a notorious case of so-called honour killing.
She wanted to live a westernised, free life, when in fact at home it was a completely different picture.
I wish my parents would be proud of what I've done, but all they think about is honour.
But we start tonight with an urgent appeal for information on a devastating house fire. It happened in Harlow in Essex. It killed a mother and her 5 children, leaving behind the father as the sole survivor. It happened just 5 weeks ago on Monday, October 15th. And tonight, for the first time, police are announcing that they are treating the deaths as murder.
Ready, 1, 2, 3, go! Oh, very good.
A father films his children playing in this previously unseen home video.
Save, don't go too deep, beta.
But now, Abdul Shakur is grieving for his whole family. In the early hours of the 15th of October, they were all upstairs in bed at home when the fire started. Dr. Shakur tried desperately to rescue his wife and children, but was overcome by smoke. His 44-year-old wife, Sabah, 9-year-old Manib, 6-year-old Rayan, and daughter Hira, who was 12, died at the scene. 11-year-old Suheeb died shortly after arriving at hospital. 3-year-old Maheen fought for her life, but also died 3 days after the fire, leaving Dr. Shakur as the only survivor.
I do not understand why my little children who were so happy and full of life, who had so much to live for, are no longer here. It is a shocking and heartbroken tragedy that within such a short period of time, I lost everything in my life.
heartbreaking, isn't it? Well, Detective Superintendent Rob Vinson is leading the investigation team. They're all here tonight. As we've said, very importantly now, you're treating the death of these 5 children and their mother as murder.
This is an absolutely tragic case and actually unprecedented for Essex Police, just really because of the sheer scale of the loss.
The information you have then, let's take a look at that. Importantly, there was a burglary that night at their house.
Yes, we've recovered a laptop case. It was found dumped in an area called St Michael's Close at Harlow. It belonged to Dr Shakur and it was stolen that night in a burglary. Now, it's an HP case, similar to the one that I've got here.
Yeah.
Now, crucially, it contained a laptop lead. Now, the lead is unusual because it was bought abroad and it had a 2-pin plug on the end of it. Also missing is a laptop. A Toshiba satellite laptop that's black is missing and still. So if you know where that laptop is, if you've seen a 2-pin plug lead, if you've seen anyone dumping that bag or seen the laptop bag, come forward.
As well as all this stuff, crucially, of course, you need witnesses.
Absolutely. There's still people who are in Barnmead at the time of the fire who haven't yet come forward. In particular, we've got descriptions of a group of 4 youths who were in the area at the time of the fire, located here on the map.
Okay.
Described as one being taller than the others, possibly wearing tracksuits, possibly with baseball caps. Also, 2 other youths on bikes who were in the area at the time. If that was you, if you know who they are, please come forward.
Very close by, there was a car set on fire that night. Do you think that's important?
There was. At the same time as the house was on fire, a car was set light as well. Just round the corner, there was a silver Focus belonging to a neighbour. If you know how that took place, what happened there, please let us know.
OK, Rob, thanks very much. As we saw there from that little piece of film, a family destroyed and the grieving father, he is desperate for any answers. I wonder if you can help. If you can, I would urge you to call the studio now. You know our number. It's 0500 600 600, or you could speak anonymously to Crime Stoppers. They're offering a reward of up to £10,000 for information tonight. They're on 0800 555 111. Now, Martin has the first of tonight's wanted faces.
First tonight, we urgently need to find dangerous escape prisoner Ivan Leach, who also uses the name Lee Cyrus. He was serving a life sentence for robbery but failed to return to prison in Lincolnshire after day release. 47-year-old Leach is originally from Preston in Lancashire but has also lived in Blackburn. Now, since escaping, he has been linked to a serious offence in Scotland. This CCTV footage shows him trying to withdraw money from a cash machine in Nottingham on October the 20th. And he was also caught on camera on a train travelling between Preston and Manchester that same day. But detectives believe he may now be in the Hampstead area of London. He has a distinctive scar on his top lip under his nose and 2 tattoos, one of the name Annette on his bicep of his left arm and the figure of a barbarian woman on the back of his right shoulder blade. He might have changed his appearance and grown a beard and moustache to try and evade capture. Leach is considered to be extremely dangerous, so if you see him or know where he is, just call 999 immediately. Next is David Onyebuchi. The 44-year-old is wanted in connection with the importation and supply of millions of pounds worth of cocaine. Onyebuchi, who's originally from South Africa, has links to Dublin and Belfast, as well as to northwest and southeast London. Number 3 is Serhat Aslan. Now, detectives want to speak to the 28-year-old in relation to the murder of a man in Turkey. The 19-year-old victim was stabbed following an argument in a cafe in 2004. Aslan is believed to have travelled to London after the murder, but officers think he could now be anywhere in the UK. And lastly, for now, is Lee Ronald Whitting. He's a registered sex offender who's wanted after breaching the terms of his licence and in connection with a serious assault which happened in July. Whitting, who's known to have previously lived an itinerant lifestyle, sleeping in tents and unoccupied caravans, is described as having an odd accent as a result of living abroad. He has a circular burn scar on his left forearm and another burn scar on the back of his left hand, as well as a tattoo of a phoenix on his right shoulder blade. The 32-year-old has links across the West Country and to North Yorkshire. Now, as always, all of tonight's faces are on the website, and if you know where they are, call 0500 600 600, or you can text 63399. Type crime, leave a space, and then your message.
Now, back in August, 68-year-old Clement Desmere, or Butch, as he was widely known, was brutally murdered in his own home in Bradford in West Yorkshire. Police believe he was tortured before he died, but the motive behind the attack remains a complete mystery.
Hello? Hello?
I think our next door neighbour's dead.
Okay, is there any suspicious circumstances?
The house is a mess.
Is he breathing or anything like that?
I've touched his arm, it's freezing cold.
Butch Desmere had lived here on the Ravenscliffe estate in Bradford for the past 20 years. But now what was his home is a crime scene. In August, Butch's body was found slumped in his favourite armchair. He'd been stabbed more than 40 times and his face partially covered with a pillow. The horrendous way Butch was murdered and the suffering he must have endured has had a profound effect on his family.
The last thing I think about every night is how he died. And as much as I want to believe it happened quickly, and I prayed that he wouldn't have pain, I know he did, and I know he's suffered.
In his younger days, Butch was a musician playing the pubs and clubs of Bradford. In fact, he was something of a local celebrity.
Everybody knew him, and growing up, I couldn't go anywhere without anybody saying, "You're Butch's daughter." His voice was like velvet, and women would just throw themselves at him, and men would just want to be him. He was just everything.
Let's go and take a look. It's a good place.
On the morning of the 22nd of August, Butch had visited a local farm shop with a friend. He was planning to buy some chickens to put in his backyard.
They were childhood friends. Dave had moved back into the area and found out that my dad was just living on a couple streets over, and just went and knocked on the door, and they just hit it off like they had never been apart from each other, really.
After saying goodbye to his friend, Butch then went shopping at his local Asda in Greengates. As always, Butch caught the bus home from the supermarket. It was only one stop, and he arrived at the end of his road, Rollston Rise, at 12:56. We don't know where Butch went next. But over 3 hours later, at 4:20 p.m, Butch was seen walking to his home with a younger man. Witnesses say he wasn't the kind of person Butch was usually seen with. He was wearing a bomber jacket and a blue baseball cap. That was the last time Butch was seen alive. In the early hours of the following morning, a neighbour noticed two people at Butch's door. They also noticed that the lights in the house went on at the same time. The house lights were still on the following afternoon. It was then that concerned neighbours made the gruesome discovery.
Get off me! Get off! Get off!
Butch had been brutally attacked. He had over 70 separate injuries, including in excess of 40 stab wounds down one side of his body. 4 of the stab wounds had pierced his rib cage, and 2 had punctured his lung. Detective Superintendent Mark Ridley is leading the investigation and has allowed us inside Butch's house. Mark, there's stuff absolutely everywhere here. This place has been ransacked, hasn't it?
Yeah, when we discovered Butcher's body, this floor was absolutely covered. Drawers and cupboards had been emptied, furniture had been knocked over, and items taken from the mantelpiece. And there was strewn absolutely everywhere. It was clear the house had been ransacked.
And this is the chair where you found Butch, isn't it?
Yeah, this is where Butch was brutally murdered. There was blood and all the indications are that this is where he was a subject of a sustained and violent attack. The type and number of injuries lead us to believe that Butch was actually tortured whilst he was sat in this chair.
And from all of this here, what have you managed to actually learn?
We have recovered hundreds of items that have now gone for forensic examination. We're hopeful that they will give us the answers that we're actually looking for.
The brutal reality of what happened behind this cordon is hard to believe. The detectives here are convinced the answers lie locally. But until someone comes forward with that information, Butch's family will continue to ask why.
You try and try to think of the good times, the better times, and the best times. But it's always the worst vision you can possibly imagine that's the last in your head.
What a horrible thing. Well, Detective Superintendent Mark Ridley, who we saw in the film, is with me now in the studio. Two things particularly you want to focus on. He was seen with a guy in the afternoon, and then this odd visitation at 3 a.m. in the morning. Tell us more.
Yeah, these people clearly hold vital information at the very least, which will give us an idea of what happened in the last hours before Butch Desmere died. And it's a real strong possibility that one or more of these people were actually responsible for his murder. I'm also convinced that one or more of these people will have confided in somebody close to them about what has happened. And I would appeal to that individual to come forward and tell us about that guilty secret that you're hiding.
OK. It's an awful thing when anybody is murdered anywhere. The distinction of this case is the torture. Do you think that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. The injuries and the torture that Butch sustained was absolutely shocking. He'd received over 40 stab wounds. The motive for this we don't know about. We don't know what caused somebody to subject an elderly man to such an ordeal, and we'll be keen to hear from anybody who can shed any light on that for us.
And there also is a reward that's worth mentioning?
Yes, the Crime Stoppers charity have offered a reward of up to £5,000 for anybody who provides information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for this brutal murder of Butch Desmere.
OK, thanks for joining us. If you can help find out who did this awful thing, please do call us now. Do the right thing, 0500 600 600 for the studio, or you could call Crime Stoppers. You might prefer to do that anonymously, 0800 555 111. And indeed, if you've been a victim of crime, there is the victim support line that you can call, 0845 30 30 900. OK, now, Martin and Matthew have got the latest news on some previous cases.
And we start with a case we featured in July. 48-year-old shopkeeper and father of three, Javed Ali, died 2 weeks after he was stabbed at his newsagents in Paisley near Glasgow in June. In the last fortnight, Strathclyde police have announced that 30-year-old Lee Anderson has been charged with Javed's murder.
Next, an appeal we made in July last year. 15-year-old Negus McLean was stabbed to death after being chased by a gang through the streets of Edmonton in North London in April 2011. Well, earlier this month, 3 18-year-old men and a 16-year-old boy appeared in court charged with Negus's murder. A 16-year-old girl and an 18-year-old man have also been charged with perverting the course of justice. We'll, of course, let you know how both those cases progress.
Now the latest on two pieces of CCTV we showed you in our last programme. Firstly, the assault on a woman who was walking with her boyfriend on London's Embankment. Following calls to the studio, a 43-year-old man was arrested and subsequently charged with assault.
And you may remember this cool customer who stole a £10,000 Rolex watch from a jeweller's in Sussex in July this year. Well, after we showed that CCTV, several police officers and jewellers got in touch and identified him as 37-year-old David Stevenson from Doncaster. He was arrested and has since admitted a series of thefts across the country in which jewellery and watches worth more than £300,000 were stolen. He'll be sentenced later this year. A great result. Martin.
Time now for some CCTV, starting with a truly shocking attack on a 16-year-old girl, which happened in East London last Tuesday lunchtime. As the teenager walks down Plaistow High Street, a man who'd been following her rushes up behind her and punches her full force to the head before running off. The impact of the blow immediately knocking the victim unconscious. An unprovoked and vicious attack on a teenage girl. Who is this tough guy? On board the number 134 bus, heading towards Finchley in North London during the early hours of a Sunday morning last month. Two men make themselves comfortable on the back seat. As the bus comes to the end of the line, the men get up and make their way to the front. There's an argument with the driver about their fares, and as he gets off the bus, the taller man in the dark jacket punches him, raining down blows. The beating continues down the street, ending up in front of another bus. The ferocity of the attack fractured the driver's eye socket, injuries from which he is still recovering more than a month later. Police need to find this violent thug and this vital witness. Names, please. We're in southeast London this time, early in the morning at Deptford train station on a Friday in August. A skinny man in a rather snazzy cardigan is hanging around the station. A few seconds later, a woman chatting on her mobile walks past. As she turns the corner, the man grabs her and tries to wrestle the phone from her. She fights with him, but he eventually gets the handset and runs off. Time for you to pick up your phone and tell us who he is. Cameras at a private home in Ripley in Surrey capture two shady characters wandering around on a Tuesday afternoon in July. The pair spend a good few minutes walking around the garden, casing the joint, even clambering onto the roof of the house. Hello. They've spotted one camera and tried to knock it down. But unfortunately for them, there are plenty more. One of the men has a piece of metal which he uses unsuccessfully to try to force open the door. Eventually, they do get in through a first-floor window, and they help themselves to jewellery worth £25,000. But they nearly lose their loot as they make their getaway. Oops. Name these butterfingered burglars tonight. Lots more CCTV still to come, and you can see it all again on the website. Call 0500 600 600 if you can help, or text on 63399. Type crime, leave a space, and then your message.
Right, still to come tonight, how forensic psychologists are helping potential witnesses recall any sightings of 2-year-old Catrice Lee. She went missing from an army base in Germany in 1981.
One of the techniques is to recreate accurately what it was like then, because that's going to serve to elevate the likelihood that you're going to get the accurate memories coming to the surface, and also to suppress the inaccurate ones.
And how the strangely detached behaviour of Shafilia Ahmed's parents added to the suspicion that they were guilty of her murder.
He doesn't really give any details about what his daughter was like. In fact, he doesn't name his daughter.
What the girl actually said when we spoke to her as well, right, is...
He objectifies her, almost like he can't bring himself to call her Shafilia.
But before that, time for some more Wanted Faces with Martin.
Firstly, in this section, we have brothers Jason and Stephen Soul. Police are looking for them as they failed to comply with the terms of their licences after being released from prison. 37-year-old Jason, who's also known as Jay or Jason Brindley Davis, was released in 2004 after being convicted of murder in 1992. He has scars on the right of his neck and on his right hand, and tattoos of a dragon and feathers on his left arm. He has links throughout the Gwent Valley in South Wales and is considered to be dangerous, so do not approach him. Jason is believed to be with his younger brother, Stephen Soul. Now, the 26-year-old breached his licence after being released from prison in June, where he'd been serving a sentence for arson. Stephen also has several tattoos, including Nat, spelt N-A-T, on his right wrist, and Shane, written on his right arm. Number 7 is Mohammed Tahar Tabta. He seriously injured a man in an unprovoked attack in Bournemouth in January. The victim was severely beaten, suffering multiple fractures to his skull and jaw, as well as bleeding to the brain. Tabta was convicted of GBH, but failed to turn up to be sentenced at court. The 39-year-old, who's originally from Algeria, has 2 tattoos, a flying horse on his right shoulder and a swallow on his right hand. And finally tonight is Michael Anthony Barmer. Now, he served a sentence for murdering his neighbour in 1983, but since being released on licence in 2011 has disappeared. The 61-year-old has connections across Devon and Cornwall and to Lancashire, but detectives think he may now be in Ireland. Call and text on the usual numbers if you recognise any of tonight's faces. And, of course, they're all online.
Now, this is something that, let's be honest, every parent dreads. The moment that you lose sight of a child and you fear the worst. Well, it's exactly what happened to the Lee family, whose little daughter, Catrice, went missing from a supermarket on a British Army base in Germany back in 1981. It was her 2nd birthday. Over the years, the family have become increasingly critical of attempts made at the time to find their daughter. Well, now the Royal Military Police has relaunched the case with a whole new team, and they hope they will finally uncover what happened to Catrice.
My daughter's never been seen since the moment that she left the checkout and went to run after me. For 31 years as a family, we have been living without an answer. The wound doesn't heal, it only becomes deeper.
The disappearance of Catrice Lee is one of the Royal Military Police's longest-running investigations. I've come to their base here in Bulford, Wiltshire, to find out why the RMP hope finally to discover what happened all those years ago.
Hello, it's Corporal Chisholm calling in from the Royal Military Police for Operation Review.
When Catrice disappeared in 1981, many of the policing and forensic techniques employed today simply didn't exist. The challenge facing officers in this major incident room is to apply modern detective techniques to a case that's over 30 years old. In the 1980s, the West German town of Paderborn was home to a British Army base, and the Lees were one of hundreds of military families living and working there.
I had 2 daughters. Natasha was 7 at the time, and Catrice was 2 years old, and we were just a normal, happy military family.
But on November the 28th, 1981, which was Catrice's 2nd birthday, the family's lives would change forever. That morning, many families had just been paid and were getting in some early Christmas shopping at the base's supermarket, or NAFI.
And I suddenly remembered that I'd forgotten the crisps for Catrice's birthday party. I ran back up the aisle, came back to the checkout, and I said to my sister, where's Catrice? And she said she followed you. I went all the way around the NAFI and I couldn't find her. We searched the food hall again, the NAFI clothing hall, and that's when I started getting extremely worried. I was panic-stricken, actually.
A major operation was launched by the Royal Military Police and the West German authorities. Over the following days and weeks, an extensive search was made, which included dredging a local river. But nothing was found. Now, over 30 years on, the Royal Military Police have launched a re-investigation into Catrice's disappearance, and the team's first job is to review the hundreds of witness statements made at the time through modern eyes.
There are literally hundreds and hundreds of witnesses, but there may be a witness out there who holds some crucial evidence. Because of the progression and the development of policing, I'm keen to speak to all these witnesses again.
The detectives have turned to numerous experts for advice, including forensic psychologists.
People have, over the period of 30 years, fallen victim to losing detail, overemphasising some details, and frankly bringing in stuff that they've heard since.
What advice can you give in trying to make sure that the information they get is usable and genuine information and not an embellishment?
One of the techniques is to recreate accurately what it was like then, because that's going to serve to elevate the likelihood that you're going to get the accurate memories coming to the surface, and also to suppress the inaccurate ones.
And as part of that process, detectives have recreated the scene as a virtual reality.
With that scene having now gone, it's really important for me to get a feel of how that naffy looked like in 1981.
Now, Clive, you've got 3 theories as to what may have happened to Catrice.
I have indeed. One of them is that Catrice may have got herself out of the naffy of her own accord and walked across that busy car park there that we can see at the back, negotiated those 2 buildings and met her fate, sadly, by falling in the very fast-flowing River Lippe. And, of course, we've never recovered a body.
Now, if that is what happened, it's a tragic accident. If that didn't happen, then what we're left with, the other 2 remaining theories, are far more sinister.
They are indeed. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that Catrice was abducted for sexual gratification and then subsequently murdered. The third viable hypothesis is that Catrice was abducted as a surrogate child by a couple or an individual who simply couldn't have children, and that she's alive and well to this day, but completely unaware of her background and indeed her true identity.
And as part of the theory that Catrice is still alive, the investigation has commissioned images of her as she might have looked at different stages of her life.
Catrice was so young when she went missing. Normally, I wouldn't do an age progression of a child until they were at least 2. She went missing on her 2nd birthday. This is one of the hardest cases I've worked on, going from not even 2 to 6 to 11 to 16, and then all the way up to 33 as she'd be now. It's obviously extremely difficult.
And using family photos as a reference point is a key technique in Terry's work.
One of the things is just how similar Catrice looks to her mum, particularly in the young toddler photos. We've got an image of Catrice, nearly 2, and a similar photo of her mum. They're remarkably similar, so that was useful to use older photos of her mother to then help assess how Catrice would age. For example, some feedback from the family was useful just to alter and define the jaw shape here and to get the right size of those facial features.
Even though Catrice would be 33 now, each image at each stage of her life could be crucial to the investigation.
We can illustrate that, you know, at age 6, she would probably be in school somewhere, at age 11, 16, growing into a teenager. Different people are going to know her at those different ages. Hopefully something in one of those images will help someone to recognise her or give us that crucial piece of information.
It's just the never knowing, you know, what did I want for Christmas, what did I want for my birthday? Well, it was I wanted Catrice back.
Today, I could be sitting here being a grandmother and I know nothing about that. I've missed my daughter growing up, missed her teenage years. On Mother's Day, I'm always a card short. We are never going to forget.
The wound doesn't heal, it gets deeper, says her mother. Well, Major Clive Robbins, who you saw in the film there, is here with us tonight and with his team. A huge amount of effort clearly is going into this reinvestigation. You will, I imagine, be wanting to trace people who were actually there, who may have witnessed something, who were in Paderborn back in 1981.
That's absolutely correct, Kirsty. I'm very keen to talk to ex-members of the military community who lived and worked in Paderborn in November 1981, and particularly those that visited the naffy on the day Catrice disappeared, either as a shopper or as an employee.
These age progression images, obviously it takes a huge effort to do all this work. Why do you think it's important?
Well, if Catrice is still alive and well, she would have gone through the normal schooling process, and it's to fellow classmates and teachers who are now appeal. If they do recognise a young girl similar to the ones depicted in these images, then I would ask them to come forward and let me know.
You've brought things that relate to what Catrice was wearing at the time. Just take us through those.
I have indeed. We know that Catrice, at the time she disappeared, was wearing a pair of red Wellington boots, very, very similar to these ones here. And also, we also know that she was wearing a turquoise-coloured duffel coat. We've had this one made by Mothercare. It is from a Mothercare range of 1981.
Right.
And this is an exact replica of that coat. It was a very common coat back in 1981, therefore I'm anticipating that there's a lot of children who would have been wearing it. Therefore, if there is, and they were at the naffy, I'd like them to come forward with their parents as well and just let us know so we can eliminate her or them as being Catrice.
OK, Major, thanks very much for all of that. I should tell you, all those images of Catrice, they're online. If you can shed any light on what happened to this little girl all those years ago, or if you've got any idea where she might be today, then please do call us. You saw the distress that her family have been going through for so long. 0500 600 600. Let's go to Matthew.
Some more updates now, starting with this CCTV showing a masked gang who attacked 2 security guards as they made a cash delivery to a bank in Beckenham in London in September 2010. Well, 2 weeks ago, the gang members who were responsible for a string of similar robberies were jailed for a total of 62 years. Emmett Wynne on the left, aged 48, and Ian Knight in the middle, 51, were both sentenced to 20 years, with Robert Hall, aged 48, on the right, receiving 22 years. A fantastic result.
In May, we asked for your help in identifying who stole a very rare 14th century jug from the Stockwood Discovery Centre in Luton. Well, in September, the piece known as the Wenlock jug, and which is worth £750,000, was located and has been returned to the museum. Staff are understandably very pleased.
We're delighted to have it back, absolutely over the moon. It's academically important because it's one of only 3 rare bronze vessels of this type that we know exist in the world. We can't wait to get it back on display.
A man has been charged with handling stolen goods.
Good news now on another theft from a museum. In May, we showed you this CCTV of a gang stealing 18 incredibly rare Chinese artefacts from the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. Well, at the end of September, 4 people were jailed in connection with that theft. 26-year-old Stephen Coughlin on the left and Robert Smith, 24, on the right, as well as a 29-year-old man who can't be identified for legal reasons, were each sentenced to 6 years after admitting conspiracy to burgle. A 16-year-old youth received a 4-month detention after admitting burglary. The stolen items, which are worth up to £15 million, have not been recovered, and there's a substantial reward on offer for information leading to their recovery. Anyone who can help should call Cambridgeshire Constabulary on 01733 863 157. Martin.
Time now for more CCTV, starting with that violent robbery at a newsagent's in Essex. It's Friday evening at the end of August, and the shop assistant is serving a customer when a man in a black ski mask brandishing a large knife rushes up to the counter. He gets behind the desk and threatens the cashier, ordering him to empty the till. As he waits, he helps himself to handfuls of cigarettes, shoveling them into a bin bag. The terrified man is unable to open the computerized till, so the frustrated robber has a go himself, taking a less technical approach. He admits defeat, grabs a few more cigarettes and scarpers. But little does he know, a customer who'd been in the shop has flagged down a passing police car. The officers confront the robber and spray him with CS gas after he tries to stab one of them, but he still manages to get away. He may have been wearing a mask, but that CS spray would have taken hours to wear off. Tell us who he is. Late at night on a Thursday in February, in an alleyway which runs alongside a supermarket in Stanmore in Middlesex, a woman is walking home. Unbeknown to her, 2 men have spotted her and chase after her. The first man in the pale hoodie appears to be carrying a gun. His friend, who seems to have a pronounced limp, tries to keep up. Just out of shot, they confront the terrified woman and threaten her with the gun, stealing her handbag and a laptop computer. She manages to push past the gunman and run off. He then calmly puts the weapon away in his own little bag before he and his limping accomplice run off, taking their ill-gotten gains with them. Names, please, for the hooded gunman and his hobbling mate. This is footage from a hidden camera installed in the home of an 80-year-old woman in Hereford. It's a Monday lunchtime at the start of last month, and 2 men have managed to get into her house. They steal £70 from her bedroom before ransacking the lounge as she watches on helplessly. The men, who claim they were police officers, stole a further £300 from the victim, money she'd been saving for a new pair of glasses. This is the 4th time she's been targeted in this way. Tell us who these scumbags are. Now, all tonight's CCTV is online, and if you recognise anyone, please call and text on the numbers on the screen.
OK, now I just want to bring you an update on something that's just come in. Rob Vincent is investigating that house fire in Essex that killed a mother and 5 children. Rob, I know you've had a very interesting call. Tell me about it.
Yeah, we've had some interesting calls come in tonight, one of which is naming a local man, so we'll be looking at that now. When we've seen the home video, really, I think you can just imagine, or try and imagine, that Dr. Shakur has lost absolutely everything that he's got, everything that's dear to him. What I need to know is, who are the 4 youths in Barnmead at the time of the fire? One significantly taller than the others. Who are the 2 youths on bikes in Barnmead at that time? Have you been offered a black satellite Toshiba laptop after the 15th of October, and have you seen the lead with 2 pins and the laptop case?
OK.
Need those calls to come in.
OK, if you know information on that, please call in. Let's bring in Mark Ridley, investigating the Butch Desmere murder in Bradford. I know you too have had a very significant call.
Yeah, we've had an excellent response this evening, and we've had one particular call putting forward a name that is of real interest to the investigation. This was a brutal murder. Butch had sustained over 70 separate injuries. I'd still like to remind people that we're keen to know who was the man seen at 4:20 the day before Butcher's body was found, but also who were the 2 people seen acting suspiciously in the early hours of the morning.
Mark, Rob, I'll let you get back to the calls. So, names coming in. Thanks very much. Keep calling. Kirsty.
This summer, Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed were convicted of the murder of their 17-year-old daughter, Shafilia, in, you will remember, a particularly notorious case of so-called honour killing. It was the culmination of a decade-long battle of wills between detectives and Shafilia's parents. Matthew takes up the story of how the Ahmeds' warped obsession with family honour and brutal oppression of their own children ultimately ended in tragedy.
She's worried about going to her friends, do this.
Desire to live is burning. My stomach is turning. But all they think about is honour.
In February 2004, workmen on the banks of the River Kent in Cumbria made a gruesome discovery. They found human remains so badly decomposed that only DNA testing and dental records would reveal their identity. The body was that of 17-year-old Shafilia Ahmed.
Shafilia was a popular, hard-working schoolgirl who was studying for her A-levels. She lived at home with her parents here in Warrington and was the eldest of 5 children. But on September the 11th, 2003, she disappeared.
A nationwide appeal was launched, but it quickly became clear that Shafilia was not a typical teenage runaway. The case was to be one of the most challenging in the history of Cheshire Constabulary and lead to a public battle between the investigators seeking the truth and Shafilia's parents, Iftikhar and Farzana Ahmed. The alarm was raised by teachers when Shafilia hadn't been seen at school for a week. Her parents seemed unconcerned and confident she would return given time. But as police began looking into her background, they discovered her home life was far from settled.
She wanted to live a westernised, free life, when in fact at home it was a completely different picture. She went to school and complained about being assaulted by her parents. She talked to her friends about a real worry about control. She was really worried about being forced into marriage.
Shafilia had sought help to get away from home several times. The last time she tried to leave had been in February 2003, but her father, Iftikhar, had waited for her at her school and forced her to go back home. Nobody could have known this was to be her last failed chance at escape.
Just a week after she returned to the family home, the Ahmeds were on a flight to Pakistan. Shafilia's parents had decided it was time for their daughter to be married.
Video footage from the time shows Shafilia at a relative's wedding. Her parents were intending the same fate for her while they were there. Frantically looking for a way out, she drank bleach. The
chemicals badly damaged her esophagus and left her battling for her life. Her parents' plan for a wedding was in tatters. Furious, they returned to the UK without her, leaving Shafilia's 12-year-old sister, Mevish, to look after her.
She's there for several weeks, getting iller and iller. I think they left her there to die.
But 3 months later, in May 2003, Shafilia was back in Warrington.
Failure.
Then, on the 11th of September, she vanished. After she disappeared, police searched Shafilia's bedroom and found some of her writings.
I wish my parents would be proud of what I've done. Instead, it's, "You've brought shame." I don't pretend like we're the perfect family no more. Desire to live is burning. My stomach is turning. But all they think about is honour.
Officers began to fear a dark secret was behind these closed doors, that she'd become a victim of so-called honour crime. Given Shafilia's troubled background, her parents' behaviour following her disappearance was looking increasingly suspicious.
At no point did the family tell us that she was ill, and they didn't really do anything to try and find her, and that's striking.
Iftikhar and Fazana Ahmed became the prime suspects.
I decided, looking at all the elements, that as a minimum they've kidnapped her and held her somewhere. So we arrested them on suspicion of kidnap.
Under questioning, Shafilia's parents gave nothing away. With little other evidence to go on, they were released. But the police family liaison officer dealing with the Ahmeds still doubted their story.
At times they did cry, but if you were to ask me, was it genuine crying? At times, I didn't think it was.
Convinced the answer to Shafilia's disappearance lay close to home, police planted a listening device in the house. The recordings revealed a tense atmosphere.
Heavy rain is causing flooding and...
3 flood warnings in force from... See a very angry-looking River Kent.
5 months after Shafilia's disappearance, the investigation took a dramatic new turn. When wet weather brought floods to Cumbria, a body was found on land next to the River Kent. Shafilia had finally been found.
With the discovery of Shafilia's body, the investigation was reignited. There was no longer any doubt. This was now a murder inquiry.
Police held a press conference, but their announcement about the body being identified as Shafilia was ambushed when her parents stormed in with their lawyer.
That inquiry should be conducted with transparency rather than being based upon any form of ethnic stereotyping.
At that point, I went out the fire exit because I didn't want to get involved in some sort of exchange in front of live cameras, really.
It was the start of a campaign by Shafilia's parents to throw the investigation into doubt. Keen to come across as grieving parents, they gave several TV interviews.
I'm not a strict parent in any way whatsoever, right? I'm as English as anybody can picture me, right? But obviously the police portrayal of me is different.
Their behaviour in those interviews seemed at odds with the picture of innocence they wanted to portray. The police consulted criminologist Aisha Gill.
You see that the body language between them is quite distant. Defensive behaviour in terms of crossing her arms is also evident. But he doesn't really give any details about what his daughter was like. In fact, he doesn't name his daughter.
What the girl actually said when we spoke to her as well, right, is...
He objectifies her, almost like he can't bring himself to call her Shafilia.
In 2005, police handed the Crown Prosecution Service the evidence they'd gathered against Shafilia's parents, but it wasn't enough.
It was a circumstantial case and there was just not sufficient to mount a prosecution at that stage. What was needed was for a member of the family to break ranks and to come forward.
The couple were unrelenting in their attacks on the investigation, even challenging the coroner's verdict of unlawful killing at the inquest. So, in February 2008, police tried a different approach and turned to Crimewatch.
We're aware there has been loads of speculation about who did it, why they did it. Tonight we are dealing just in the facts.
Someone out there needs to do the honourable thing and come forward and bring justice for Shafila.
But despite the detectives' very deliberate use of the word honourable, it provoked little response on the night.
Where's the money?
2 years later, the case took a bizarre new twist. The Ahmed's family home was attacked by armed robbers. It emerged that Shafilia's sister, Alicia, had helped plan the raid, and while being questioned away from her family, she was finally able to tell police what she knew about her older sister's death.
Her account was an emotional roller coaster, really, of what her life was like, what Shafila's life was like, but also then the disturbing, brutal act.
No one! There wasn't!
She describes Mum getting really cross about what Shafila was wearing. Iftikhar and Fazana have both partaken in the murder of Shafila by putting a plastic bag in her mouth, holding her down, and both of them suffocating her, really, in front of them all in the house. And then removing Shafila from the house later on that night.
That was the eyewitness account that we knew all along had been needed.
In September 2011, 8 years after Shafila disappeared, her parents were charged with murder. They both denied any involvement. The trial would hinge on Alicia's ability to convince the jury that her own mother and father had killed her sister.
Everybody was hanging on to every word she said, and the evidence she gave about that was very, very convincing. No one could have been in any doubt that she was describing something she had actually seen.
What happened next would be a further breakthrough for the prosecution. A new witness came forward. Back in 2008, another of Shafilia's sisters, Mevish, had confided in a friend. Mevish had written a letter describing how she'd witnessed her parents commit the murder.
They tried to kill her so many times. They achieved it third time, didn't they?
She sent the letter to her friend, Shaheen.
She just got really, really upset and she started crying. She did actually tell me, you know, the full story of what happened to her sister.
Worried for Mevish's safety, Shaheen had kept what she'd been told secret.
What I was scared of is if the police tried to intervene, can't do anything, then Mev's going back to a house where her mum and dad know that she's told someone.
But after seeing news of Alicia appearing in court, Shaheen decided it was time she too made a stand.
It was sort of Alicia's bravery to actually sit there and say it. That made me think, well, actually, you know what, I'm going to have to do what's right as well.
The jury unanimously found Iftikhar and Fazana Ahmed guilty of their daughter's murder. They were each sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years.
There was no celebrating. It was just good to see justice prevail.
A lot of us had to hold back tears because of the impact it has had on us.
It was the ultimate betrayal by the very people that Shafila should have been able to love and trust above all others.
The Ahmed's murderous act was all the more barbaric because it condemned their other children to guard their terrible secret. In the end, it took the bravery of a young woman to stand up to her parents to ensure justice was finally done.
You can talk about science, forensic evidence, lots of different things you can do, but at the end of the day, it's people, witnesses, giving that evidence to send killers to prison.
So, Matthew, a horrible, heartless crime.
Horrifying, every aspect of it. The judge said Shafili was trapped between two cultures. Sentencing her parents, he said to them, "Your concern at being shamed in your community was greater than your love for your own child."
We heard from the investigating detectives there, no celebration when this verdict came through, because for them it had become a huge part of their lives, this investigation.
Yeah, Geraint Jones, who you saw leading this, half his entire police career had been on this one case. The team was relentless. No detail was too small. A good example of that is one of the photos on the board, because as soon as detectives saw it, they thought it seemed out of context. They examined it, they blew up the photo, they found a tiny crest on the door behind them. That crest was from a registry office in Denmark. This photo was Iftikhar getting married to a Danish woman in the 1980s. It was a whole other secret life he never, ever talked about. He'd lived this westernised lifestyle, alcohol, discos, women, that sort of thing. The polar opposite of what he'd stamped down on his other family 20 years later. And he was furious detectives had found out about this. But that's how they built this case, bit by bit by bit, building up the pressure.
What about these honour crimes? I mean, occasionally they raise their heads in the media, but mostly they seem to be very much below the surface.
Yeah, it is hidden, and honour, of course, is the very last thing it actually is. The Crown Prosecution Service think there are about 12 of these murders like this every year in this country, but it's a tiny fraction of honour-based crime. Most of that revolves around forced marriages. Breaking the wall of silence is the critical thing. Here, it took 9 years, but they did it.
Just quickly, I want to ask you about something entirely different. You were reporting a lot on these new police commissioners. Not that many people voted, but you think they will prove to be important people?
It is a massive change. They say the biggest change in police accountability for 200 years. I mean, the idea is pretty simple. These are the people that are supposed to lead the fight against crime in their area. They've been given big new powers. They have the power to hire and fire chief constables, the power to set the priorities for the police. But there's a big debate about whether it will work, whether it will cut crime. There's no debate that it is a major new dynamic in policing. I think we'll hear a lot about these new police commissioners in the coming years.
Always good to talk to you, Matthew. Thanks very much. Yeah. Now, just time for a last quick update on what's coming in on the phones. Martin?
Kirsty, yes, detectives have had a lot of calls on the disappearance of Catrice Lee from that army base in Germany over 30 years ago. All those calls, though, so far from people they've already spoken to. They do want to receive those, but they're desperate to speak to people they haven't yet interviewed. Don't stop calling in if you think you have information, but we need new calls.
OK, that's everything for now. Remember, all of tonight's reconstructions and the CCTV and the wanted faces, they're all online. The address, bbc.co.uk/Crimewatch. And you can also get the latest news on Twitter, which is @BBC Crimewatch. The phone lines, they're going to stay open until midnight tomorrow. We're going to be back again at 10:45 tonight after the lottery with the very latest on all of tonight's calls. Join us then. Bye-bye.